Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the stream. Happy Monday. Happy MLK Day, which apparently is like wildly controversial this year for me to say, regardless of how you feel about Martin Luther King Jr. and every single aspect of his life. I hope we can all keep celebrating today the idea of a future America that is built on the content of our character and not the color of our skin. I, for one, am sure celebrating that today, and I hope that you guys are as well. I have a little bit of a cold, in case you can't tell. I spent most of the weekend in either A, a blizzard, or B, stuck in an airport with lots and lots of flight delays. So I'm trying to recover from my cold. We are going to have a bit of a shorter stream today to make sure that I can preserve my voice for the rest of the week, because it is a very big week. We've got the Iowa Caucus tonight. It's the World Economic Forum annual meeting this week. It's the March for Life in Washington, D.C. later this week, which I hope to see as many of you at as humanly possible. I am there every single year and will be virtually helping to MC the live stream and some social media content for Students for Life's annual National Pro-Life Summit on Saturday. So lots and lots to be said in the next couple of days, and therefore must preserve the voice as much as possible. But we had to stream together today because today is a really, really big day in the world of politics. If you guys are not from the United States of America, or you don't really follow politics that closely, today is the Iowa Caucus, which is the big first major event when it comes to determining the results of a primary election going into a presidential election. Tonight in Iowa, a bunch of people, hundreds of thousands of people, are going to come together and decide who Iowa is nominating to be their pick for the primary for the Republican Party. It's a very crowded field. It's a really interesting, controversial time when it comes to Republican politics. And I was invited by one particular campaign last week to come join them boots on the ground in Iowa, across the entire state of Iowa, for their campaign, and that is the Vivek Ramaswamy campaign. I was super excited about the invite. You guys know I've been really outspoken and vocal about not knowing at all where I'm standing on the 2024 election for the last several months, that I was kind of like half in, half out with pretty much every single major candidate, which was a really shocking realization for me because that's never how I am in the world of politics. I typically am a very decisive person. I've worked in politics for a really long time, so it's easy for me to kind of sift through the noise and the weeds and find my guy every single time. And I've just felt really uninspired and frustrated and confused for the 2024 election. I'm sure many of you guys probably felt the exact same way or still do. I have a lot to be said in the future about specifically what campaign I will be supporting and all of those things. I'm not quite ready to talk about that. But more importantly, I had an incredible experience with the Ramaswamy campaign on the ground in Iowa, and I'm so grateful for the invite and the opportunity to see up close and personal the point of view of what that looks like for what it takes to run for president of the United States. I have obviously worked in politics for a long time. I've worked in DC and on the nonprofit and campaign side of things, but this was really my first up close and personal experience with a presidential candidate in terms of what a day in the life actually looks like for them. And while the mainstream media is really intently trying not to cover the Ramaswamy campaign for whatever reason, it was a cool experience knowing that this campaign is so laser focused on getting the message out there anyway, through any means necessary, and namely through independent content creators and social media. So I am not at all the only influencer or creator that has been invited to join the Ramaswamy campaign for a day on the campaign trail. The day before me, Candace Owens was there, which was awesome. Too bad our paths didn't cross because she's great and I love her. The day after me, they had like 4 or 5 influencers and content creators come spend the day with them on the campaign trail, and they are very aware of the need to use social media as a powerful means of communication for the 2024 election. So I was really excited about the opportunity. It was incredibly eye-opening. I'm going to share with you a little bit about my experience here in just a second and share with you a little snippet from our day together, about a 10-minute interview that we did literally in a stairwell of a random hotel at 10 o'clock p.m. after a very, very long day spent in the car. We're going to get to that here in just a second. But first, in case you guys don't already know this about American politics, I want to tell you exactly what is happening today, because I do think this is actually important. So today is the Iowa Caucus. As I just mentioned, caucuses and primaries are different things. And I'll explain that to you here in just a sec with a very handy guide from CBS News, who we don't really love, but this guide was very helpful. This is really the first major event, as I mentioned, for what the future of the 2024 election is going to look like. And I'm just going to say up front, it's not typically the person that wins the Iowa caucus that wins the actual primary election for the Republican Party. Way more often than not, and the Democrats, by the way, way more often than not, it's the people who surprise you in Iowa and exceed polling expectations that go on to win the general primary election and potentially even the general election for president of the United States in that particular cycle. So in 2016, for example, Donald Trump did not win the Iowa caucus. Ted Cruz did. But Donald Trump outperformed all of the expectations from the talking heads in the media and all of the pollsters and everybody who said he wasn't really running for president to become president of the United States. In 2012, Mitt Romney did not win the Iowa caucus. Rick Santorum won the Iowa caucus and exceeded a whole lot of expectations for what this is supposed to look like. So, very exciting stuff, but just generally speaking, especially if you guys are watching from abroad, because I know we have a lot of international viewers, I want to talk about this with you for just a second. Caucuses and primaries are fundamentally different things, but they kind of yield the same result when it comes to American elections. So a caucus is really complex. It's very difficult to explain, but basically a ton of people gather in a room and figure out who we want to be our guy. And they argue about it, and there's longstanding debate and lots of stuff going back and forth. And then they all come together to express their support for a particular candidate, essentially majority rules. So unlike a primary where you could mail in your ballot or you could just show up yourself to a polling location and vote, caucuses actually require voters, I like how CBS said this, require voters to physically attend specific meetings, which demands a higher level of commitment, which also means lower voter turnout. So really, there's only going to be maybe, and with the weather, this is probably a huge overestimate, a few 100,000 people there representing the entire state of Iowa. And this process of assigning delegates in the caucuses also looks different for each individual state. But basically, like, if you show up, you get to be a part of the experience versus a primary election where voters actually participate by casting a ballot the same way that you would cast a ballot in a general election. You select your candidate in a really straightforward manner. You have the opportunity to cast your own ballot and write it on a piece of paper. It's not this back and forth debate or argument or general consensus that's needed to actually select your guy. It typically has higher participation in that process and is a much more accessible voting process because you don't actually have to show up in person, so to speak. But this Iowa caucus is kind of the main event in the media this week and moving forward for the presidential candidacy for 2024. And I think this is a really interesting analysis of this. So before we jump into our interview with Vivek and my experience on the ground, I wanted to read this with you. Why do presidential candidates care so much about the Iowa caucus? Every single presidential campaign has had a massive team on the ground for months in Iowa. Field offices in Iowa. Vivek, as one example, has a second apartment now in Iowa where they have been living as a second residence, because it's so important to be there, boots on the ground in Iowa specifically. And the reason for that is that historically in America, presidential candidates have looked to Iowa to launch themselves and to brand themselves and gain widespread support for the larger primary election for their party. But again, just as I said, typically it's not the best predictor of who is actually going to be the primary winner when it comes to the outcome of the Iowa caucus. It's usually not the winner that ends up being the nominee. It's the person who surprises you. Like I said, in 2008, it was Mike Huckabee who won the Iowa caucus, not, do you guys remember who that was? Anybody remember in 2008? John McCain. It was not Mitt Romney that won in 2012. It was Rick Santorum. And it was not Donald Trump in 2016 that won Iowa. It was Ted Cruz. None of those people went on to clinch the nomination. Similarly, I talked about this with Dave on People of the Internet today. But for the Democrat Party, Bill Clinton won only 2.8% of the Iowa caucus when he was there, and he went on to be called the comeback kid in the media. He also got totally trampled in New Hampshire, which people also think is a really key indicator of who is going to be the most successful potential nominee for the party. And obviously, we know he ended up going on to be president of the United States. So when you're watching the results come out tonight, don't necessarily look at the person who won the vast majority of the vote for the Iowa caucus. You should be looking for the person that is outpacing and outperforming all of the expectations that the media and that pollsters have set for that particular individual. And I think, for one, tonight, in just a few hours, we're going to see a big, relatively big, shakeup in what that performance is expected to be. Obviously, everybody has a pretty accurate prediction, in my opinion, that Donald Trump will win the Iowa caucus. I believe that wholeheartedly. But I think when it comes to the second, third, fourth place in all of this, you look at candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy, who are only polling in the high single digits. I think there could be a really interesting shakeup and change of events theoretically happening based on my experience, boots on the ground in Iowa, with the second, third, fourth place there in the state of Iowa. So all of that to be said, I wanted to share with you guys a little bit about my experience in what happened in Iowa on Friday when I was there, the things that I was really surprised by when it came to the Ramaswamy campaign, and of course our interview together from 10 p.m. in a random hotel stairwell that I promise is coming to you. But first, about my experience a little bit. This was the only presidential campaign for 2024 that had proactively reached out to me about something to do when it came to independent content creation and opportunities to work together. I was really, really happily, pleasantly surprised by that, because you guys know I have been hugely outspoken about how the right, particularly the Republican Party, has completely missed the mark with reaching youth voters, which is an important factor going into 2024, right? Because for the first time ever in this presidential election, millennials and Gen Z together are going to make up the vast majority of the voter demographic for who decides the president of the United States. It's not the traditional suburban moms rule. It's not the traditional baby boomer or elderly vote that people are trying to go after. In order to win, you have to start connecting with youth voters to make your case to be president of the United States. And for whatever reason, most Republican candidates have completely neglected that opportunity, bigger than opportunity, that responsibility, by ignoring social media, by chastising social media, by suggesting that people like myself, independent content creators, aren't serious journalists and therefore have nothing to say, and that if a candidate were to, I don't know, do a TikTok trend, they're not a serious candidate and they're more interested in chasing clicks than actually being the president. When in reality, ignoring all of these things or chastising them or separating yourself from young people in America completely backfires in your ability to translate your ideas to a new generation that is really desperate for meaning, for value, for purpose. We've talked about this a lot, so I won't go into too many semantics on this on today's stream in particular. But the left, generally speaking, has a grip and an importance of social media, independent content creators, and communicating your ideas in a new, fresh, and fun generational way than the right, for whatever reason. So when I got the invitation from the Ramaswamy campaign to just come spend the day with them, do a little bit of an interview for my live stream, put a vlog together, make some fun, trendy TikTok videos, I was really floored at their campaign's ability to grasp that concept, especially in a time where the right has really been delulu about the opportunity to connect with youth voters. So immediately, obviously, I accepted. I jumped on a plane after many, many cancellations and lots of travel headaches up to Des Moines, Iowa, and spent the entire day Friday from about 6 in the morning to about 10 o'clock at night with the Ramaswamy campaign at numerous events, watching him do some media hits, interviewing him myself, and it was incredibly eye-opening, the things that I was able to see and the things that I was able to learn about this individual that the mainstream media seems incredibly hell-bent on trying to discredit, trying to make look stupid, or even trying to isolate and alienate from the American people. And that's not just left-wing media, by the way. A lot of right-wing media is trying to do exactly the same thing. I've heard from a lot of people in my life, my friends, some of my family members, lots of people that I work with in politics, that they expect Vivek Ramaswamy to be this super angry, divisive, horrible person that speaks really in these one-line zingers and has no sense of connection or awareness with the American people, especially after the attack from Donald Trump on Truth Social and on Twitter last week. Lots of people are trying to suggest that he's this Soros-funded World Economic Forum plant and he's secretly a leftist that's trying to destroy the Republican Party from the inside out. And so I went in kind of with my guard up. I'd never met him personally, but I'd heard a lot of mixed reviews views about how people were responding to his campaign, and had obviously seen his performance at several of the presidential debates that I attended in person, was pleasantly surprised by all of the things that he had to say. But similar to Donald Trump in 2016, there was kind of this like rubbing certain people the wrong way phenomenon, that people didn't like when Donald Trump had all these evil nicknames for people, and people didn't like when he interrupted people and was kind of crass and rough around the edges. And so I kind of expected a similar phenomenon with Vivek Ramaswamy, and actually found the complete opposite about his character and the type of person he is, and more importantly, the type of dedication and stamina that he would have to be president of the United States, which is a very important qualifying factor Americans have fundamentally forgotten about in the last several presidential elections, probably because most of our presidential candidates are like 95 years old and can't remember their own name, and certainly don't have the energy and the stamina and the endurance to do what it takes to be an effective president. I mean, for God's sake, our current president of the United States probably spends about 75% of his time napping in Delaware rather than running the country or preventing World War III or trying to improve our economy or any of the other roles and responsibilities the president of the United States is supposed to embrace. So I was floored, all for the right reasons, when I was witnessing this person from 6 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night, constantly 100% of the time on the money, ready to be president of the United States. I witnessed Vivek do countless events throughout the day across the state of Iowa. We spent about 8 hours in the car in the middle of a blizzard cyclone where realistically we probably really shouldn't have been driving, but we did because he promised to keep every single one of his campaign engagements that they had scheduled for that day, going to trucking companies on the side of the road, going to different event venues in super rural towns, family-owned restaurants, meeting with people in hotels, wherever they were staying, coming across the state of Iowa for the caucus on Monday. And I found this fascinating phenomenon that he was using every single second of the day, every possible second available to him, to make sure that his campaign was showing up in a way that the other campaigns really weren't. Most of the other campaigns took the day off on Friday because it was a huge blizzard. Nobody wanted to be out on the roads. The bus drivers were saying, we're not driving your campaign buses. So we ended up taking SUVs, 2 different SUVs instead. But while he was in the car for 2, 3, 4 hours at a time, he was constantly 100% of the time doing interviews with the newspaper or with magazines, doing live TV hits from the back of the car in the dark, where his staff was having to hold up these incredible bar lights and a professional camera. In one of his hits, I'm actually like hiding under the seat behind him so that you can't see me in the shot. He was running his own social media, retweeting his own things, posting his own things to Instagram. There was not a team doing this. And I discovered that his team has been to all 99 counties in Iowa at least twice and has done almost 400 events across the state of Iowa in the past few months, which is more than 3 times the number of the events put on by any of the other campaigns combined. And it showed, because whether we were going to a smaller event with a few dozen people that weren't necessarily sure if they were all in on Vivek, but were interested in learning more about his campaign, or we spoke to a group of 400 people, there was this sense of appreciation for showing up is half the battle, and for this person being willing to show up for Iowans in a place and a time where it was pretty normal for it to be a blizzard, right? Iowans were out and about, but the other candidates weren't to the same degree that he was. And more than anything, I was completely blown away by the makeup of the audience at these events. We were, again, at trucking stops, at random event venues, at family-owned restaurants, at hotel ballrooms, and overwhelmingly, the crowd that turned out to see Vivek Ramaswamy was young professionals, was college students, was people under the age of about 25 who they themselves had driven from all over the Midwest, obviously all across the state of Iowa, but Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Kansas. People drove all the way from Kansas to be there in person to shake this person's hand and to hear his vision for the future of conservatism, for the future of the Republican Party, for the future of America first, and having this idea of a new generation of leadership, this tagline that he keeps repeating at all of the debates and in part of his stump speech. which honestly shocked and amazed me. Namely because on social media, I'd seen a lot of criticism from young voters, namely young voters on the left, about the Vivek campaign. Specifically, his idea that if you're under 25 years old, you need to pass a civics test in order to vote to prove that you're invested in this election, or you have to serve in some sort of public service role, be it the military or as a first responder. And a lot of people had criticized his campaign for that, saying that was trying to disenfranchise youth voters, that was missing the mark, the same way that the Republican Party has nothing to say on social media, that it's all these old, angry, curmudgeon people that just don't seem to get it. So I wasn't expecting 90% of the audience at all of these events to be under the age of 25 and to be all in on Vivek Ramaswamy. The questions that were being asked were from kids who were 16, 17, 20, 21, people saying, I'm not old enough to vote for you, but I'm trying to get my parents to vote for you. Or a young professional or college student saying, you resonate with my political philosophy so much more than anyone I've ever met in the Republican Party. I'm an independent, but I want to support you. And my eyes were just opened to this kind of like light bulb moment that no one else on the right, truly no one else on the right, I can't think of anyone, has that level of intimate connection and opportunity with young voters that I believe Vivek Ramaswamy has as a candidate. And I'm not saying that because that's my personal opinion. I'm saying that because that's what I objectively witnessed the entire time that we were in Iowa and in the response that I've gotten from the content that we have put out on social media. So it was just an incredibly eye-opening experience. But to speak to his character as an individual, he comes across in the media and from all of these interviews with CBS or the Wall Street Journal or even Fox News as kind of this abrasive, angry, divisive, hateful, speaks in these one-liner mega drop own the libs concepts. And in reality, Vivek Ramaswamy had this calming, grounding energy about him every time he spoke to a crowd. And we have great footage of that coming to you guys very soon in a full day vlog that my team is putting together right now. But every time he spoke to a crowd, he would speak very slowly. He utilized pauses quite often. He connected with people in the audience individually. And whether someone came to just take a picture with him or came to ask him a question or came to just hear what he had to say, he has that unique ability that very few people in the world have to make someone feel like they are the only person in the world, even for 5 seconds. And I've never seen that level of intimate connection in all my years working in politics in DC, in regular America, and everywhere in between. That sense of connection from one individual, from a real person to another real person. It's not this mega fame thing that you're chasing. It's not this anticipation or this interest in going viral on social media to own the libs. It's not this endless quest to be a host on Fox. It was a genuine expressed interest in one person who's sad and frustrated at the state of affairs in our country, using their platform and their opportunity to do something about it in the greater service of other people and other people expressing their gratitude towards that. So I know you guys are hearing all kinds of really crazy, horrible things on the internet about this individual, that either he's too conservative and he's this evil white supremacist, or that he's some like Soros-funded World Economic Forum plant who's basically Obama. None of those things are true. And I think this was a great opportunity for me to reinforce in my own sphere of influence and in the conservative movement that I spend a lot of time working in, that not everything you see in a headline and not everything you see on social media is objectively true. Sometimes you have to actually go and show up, boots on the ground, to experience the truth for yourself. As for the funding thing, he is very much just like Donald Trump in 2016, funding the vast majority of his campaign himself. So I have no idea where this George Soros thing came from. It is kind of the insult that everybody on the right is using for anybody that's not Donald Trump, which is just objectively not true. But when it came to his character, I was incredibly surprised and blown away for the better with all of the things that he had to say. I had one thing that I've been criticizing him on for a very long time, and that was this under 25 voter thing, which I actually think he ended up articulating very well when I pressed him on it and asked a little bit for some clarification. We'll play that in the interview here in just a second. And I wish I could show you literally everything today from our day in Iowa, but we have lots of editing to do for you guys to make sure that that footage is ready for you. So we're putting together an awesome vlog of all of the stops that we went to, our experience with him doing news hits in a gas station, and everything in between. But here's just a small snippet of what our day looked like with Vivek Ramaswamy at 10 p.m. in a random not elevator, in a random stairwell in a hotel, because this is the type of stamina this guy has after the longest day of all time. He was ready to share his vision for America with us. Okay, so I want to start, Vivek, on this interview with the elephant that's not in the room, and that is this conversation about the RNC really not supporting your campaign and the friction that's existing there. Why do you think that's happening, and why do you think an outsider's perspective is so important?
Well, I think it's important. In some ways, Ronna McDaniel has proved my point. After I called for her resignation, it's not personal necessarily against her as an individual, it's about the results. After 5 failed years of leadership, we had disasters in 2020, 2022, 2023. What else do we actually expect other than accountability? If this is a football team, they would have been fired, the head coach would have been fired long ago. Mm-hmm. After that, I think she proved my point when she said that I wouldn't get another ounce of support or cent of funding from the RNC, acting like it's her money. And the irony is her pay went up, nearly three times over the same period that she actually failed as the leader. So it reflects just everything that's wrong with American politics. People try to treat other people's money as though it's their own, use it for purposes that don't actually advance the goals of the country. Every person who's in American politics basically today is a pawn for somebody else on a chessboard, depending on who writes the biggest check. And so I think it's going to take an outsider who's independent of that system, not to incrementally reform it, but to break it. Yeah, so we're not bringing a chisel to that, we're bringing the chainsaw. And that's what it's going to take, both with the permanent state in Washington, D.C., but even the broken machine of partisan politics. And so that's why I think it's really important for more outsiders to step into the game.
Something myself and my audience has been wildly frustrated with as young Gen Z conservative voters is how much the Republican Party seems to be missing the mark with Generation Z.
Yeah.
They discount us as crazy blue-haired socialist crybabies, not realizing that there's such an opportunity to redefine that national identity you talk so much about. What's your campaign doing that's so fundamentally different from everybody else on that front?
My sense is I think it's true of all of us, but young people in particular are hungry for an actual vision. What do we stand for? Biden bad is not an agenda. It doesn't move people. But what we stand for, even basic values like the value of the individual, the family, the nation, God, which has become a 4-letter word, but I don't think it should be, that beats race, gender, sexuality, and climate if we have the courage to actually stand for something. Right now, what is the Republican Party? I mean, that word is a hollowed out husk of itself. More than half of it wants to fork over more money to Ukraine, $200 billion that adds to the national debt that you already have on your shoulders that you didn't sign up for. One of the things I actually think is really, to me, promising about the next generation, and it will change the composition of the Republican Party for the better, is they're opposed, if I may say this, we are opposed to foreign wars that don't advance our interests. We fought too many of them for the last 25 years or more in this country. And it's critical that your generation doesn't actually end up in somebody else's trench fighting somebody else's war with somebody else's gun over your shoulder, which then adds to that national debt that you already have on your shoulders. So I think that's a good pitch for the Republican Party to make to the next generation if we can get our act together, take the Lindsey Graham, Nikki Haley, Karl Rove, Dick Cheney wing of the Republican Party and relegate it to the dustbins of history where it belongs. If we can do that, then we can actually look the next generation in the eye and say, we're the party that's going to make sure you don't grow up with that debt you didn't sign up for. We're the party that's actually going to keep you out of World War III instead of sleepwalking our way into it. We're the party that's actually going to say that if we are going to ask you in some way to serve this country, certainly those in the military are going to actually protect our own homeland right here at home in the United States of America. And I think that is an important set of commitments that the Republican Party can make to the next generation if we have a leader at the top that can actually articulate and stand for those principles. And that's part of why I'm in this, not just that I'm younger. I think it does help to be from the next generation a little bit. But because I'm standing for ideas that I think will improve the actual lives and protect the next generation against the biggest risks that we face.
Jill Biden, our first lady this week, said that
Dr. Jill Biden.
Dr. Jill, excuse me, important things, said that Joe Biden's age of our current president is actually an asset to him going into the 2024 election.
Well, she's a doctor.
Obviously true, because she's a doctor, but do you think we should have age caps for the presidency and for public office?
So I think Joe Biden has really, obviously, is off of his peak of mental acuity, which was never really that high, but it's really even below that low peak. I don't believe in disqualifications based on age, just because I think that decision should belong to the voters. And I know a lot of people who are further in advanced years than Joe Biden, who are sharper than many people who are my age or younger. I mean, John Fetterman, for God's sake, would have passed the age test, but I think probably not passed much of the competency test. And you could say the same of many Republicans who have been stuck around, outlived their welcome. Many people who are middle-aged Republicans, I don't know that Lindsey Graham, when he says a given thing about foreign policy, is making far more sense than Joe Biden is. Often they're actually saying the same thing. So I think it's actually up to the voters to say that we need a populace that actually elects the people who they deserve. And that's part of why I'm in this race. I mean, there's positions I've adopted that people say they like. Well, if you like the positions, vote for me.
Yeah.
But I don't believe in eliminating people from the ballot box based on top-down criteria. At the worst extreme, that's what they're doing to President Trump, eliminating from the ballot because some guy decided that this guy shouldn't be eligible. So I don't want to make that same mistake based on age caps, but I personally think this country would benefit with someone that has fresh legs, is from the next generation to reach and lead the next generation.
On that note then, you faced a lot of criticism early on in your campaign for talking about this under 25 voter having to take a test or serve somehow in public service in order to vote. Would you rather support maybe a national test for everyone in order
I do
to
actually.
receive? Okay.
So I do, but I think you got to start somewhere, right?
Right.
As a pragmatic matter, if somebody's already been voting for 40 years, taking that away from this one thing. But the way I look at this is we start fresh with the next generation. And look, I stand by the proposal, but I clearly, I think, have learned about a better way to explain it to people over the course of the campaign. The idea is the same, but I would just say the framing is, do we think it's reasonable for every high school senior who graduates from high school to have to pass the same civics test that every immigrant has to pass to become a voting citizen of this country? It's a good thing that we require immigrants to know something about the country. I think it's a good thing. And I think it's a good thing for every young person in this country to know the same. And we're talking basic rules of the road. How many branches of government? Who leads the executive branch of the government? I think it's a reasonable thing for someone to know before they vote for the fact that the president leads the executive branch of the government. And I think part of our crisis of national pride is that we're not proud of a country that we just passively inherit. We're proud of a country that we have a stake in building or at least knowing something about. And so I stand by that. But the point actually is to revive a sense of civic engagement, not to actually extinguish it. And that's where I'm coming from. And I stand by it, but I think that framing it more as something that we can increase the educational quality of our schools such that it would be a no-brainer, that every 18-year-old actually had that basic knowledge. I told the story earlier today at one of our events of a 10-year-old girl in Iowa who approached me. She's 10 years old. 60 out of 100 is a passing score. She got 100 out of 100. She's 10. And so it just takes a basic level of effort and care.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, we're not going to have a country left if each of us is just two-legged higher mammals walking around claiming to be American but not knowing the first thing about the country. And so I do think we need to revive that.
To wrap things up with you at 10 p.m. in a stairwell of a hotel, which is about as grassroots in Iowa as it gets. One of the things that really struck me being with you on the campaign trail today was how overwhelmingly young your audiences were at every single one of these stops. Do you have a message of support or encouragement or hope for the Republican Party and conservative America at large when it comes to Gen Z and the promise of this next generation?
Yeah, look, I think that I do. I think there's something about being 19 or 20 years old that makes you want to stick it to the man, right? And that's where a lot of wokeism and the whole, woke philosophy came from. It was about identifying the invisible injustices that previously weren't identified, sticking it to the man. Well, what began as a challenge to the system 20 years ago has now obviously become the dominant system. So if you really want to be a hippie or you want to be countercultural or you want to stick it to the man today, try showing up on a college campus and calling yourself a conservative and saying you want to get married and stay married and have children and raise a family and that you pledge allegiance to this nation, not to global citizenship. I think that is the countercultural movement of our time. And so I think we're a hair's trigger away from a massive tidal wave in our own direction. And that's part of what I hope to lead in this country. I think that's why we're going to win the general election in a landslide. I think that's part of the reason why we're going to deliver a surprise result here at the caucus in Iowa, is many of those first-time caucus goers, many of whom are young, are coming out for the first time, and I think we're going to see the support of many of them in our campaign.
Well, we can't wait to see. Thank you so much for having us on the campaign trail today.
I appreciate you guys coming.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Sorry, guys. There we go. So that was a super fun experience for me to just tag along for the day, right? That was a very small snippet of what our day actually looked like. Again, full vlog and some more interview content coming to you soon in the next couple of days. But I really wanted to share that with you in advance of the Iowa caucus tonight because I think there's this distorted sense of reality that exists on social media that doesn't really exist boots on the ground. And the same thing can be said for the mainstream media, by the way. Sometimes that shines through on social media as well. And I want to address a few things about this interview that people have already seemingly come for me about, which I find phenomenal. Number one, I posted a clip of this on Instagram and on Twitter and on TikTok earlier today. And that's this question about supporting a test for everyone rather than just anyone under the age of 25. I was highly critical of the Vivek Ramaswamy campaign for the last several months about this. In fact, I even made a video criticizing him directly for this idea that anyone under 25 needs to take a test, because I thought so specifically it was going after the youth vote. It alienates young people from conservative ideas. It makes it look like we hate young people, etc. That went really viral several months ago. But it's fascinating what happens when you just ask a clarifying question, right? How that subject and how that proposition was being covered in the mainstream media by his opponents, by people on TikTok, didn't really encapsulate the whole story. In fact, not even did he let me finish the question before he interrupted me and said, "Oh, well, I do support a test for everyone. It's not just for young people." Instantaneously, my one major objection and my one major hangup dissolved immediately. And then, of course, he clarified by saying, I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned on the campaign trail is that it's about articulating your positions and explaining them a little bit better, and not just one little one-liner that ends up going viral as a headline. But maybe the easiest way for us to implement that is to make it a graduation requirement to graduate from high school, that you can pass the same civics test as any immigrant that we would expect to come into America and have full voting rights. Immediately, you have me. I'm on board. But all it took was one clarifying question that I never would have had the opportunity to have unless I had the boots on the ground in-person experience there, or had gone to one of these events in person, not watching a debate on TV, not watching someone's 10-second TikTok analysis or reading someone's angry tweet about it, but just by asking. Then somebody ended up commenting on that clip that I put on Instagram. "Are you in love with him? Like, why are you smiling at him so much? If you want to be a real journalist and be taken seriously, you shouldn't be smiling so much." To address that question, no, I'm not a journalist. I'm a content creator, which means I'm allowed to smile at people and generally be pretty happy about life. But just that question and the level of divisiveness and anger people have brewing under their skin going into this election is a really poignant reminder of why I'm so impressed that this campaign is going around the interviews with the Wall Street Journal, the interviews with CNN, the interviews with NBC, the Fox News hits, and the town halls on MSNBC. It's bigger than that for them. This is about reinventing what it means to be a conservative, not by substance, but how we communicate it, and translating the ideas of conservative values that we have held near and dear to our hearts for generations to a new generation that doesn't have access to that translation as it stands right now, because everyone has written us off. Everyone has said that we are stupid and entitled, and someday we'll wake up and get it, while the other side is hell-bent on gaining our support today. And whether you think Vivek is the answer today in 2024, if you think he'd be a great frontrunner in 2028, if you want to see him as a running mate for Donald Trump or for anyone else, or you literally hate the guy, I hope that interview, even just a few minutes that I was able to share with you there, is eye-opening enough for people across the board in the conservative movement, right of center, Republican Party, etc., to realize the importance of new media, the importance of being a real, authentic human being, and the importance of translating ideas to the next generation moving forward. Vivek said something over and over again at most of these events that really struck a chord with me. He said, I'm an America First candidate. I've fiercely defended Donald Trump. I have nothing but respect for Donald Trump. But these ideas need to live on after the era of Donald Trump and even after the era of me. And we need fresh legs moving this forward into the next generation. It's just really gotten me thinking about how are we communicating conservative values and the beautiful, good, true things that we fight for every day to people my age and younger. Remember, I'm the first year of Gen Z at 26, almost 27 years old. Most Gen Zers are just now going to be first-time voters in 2024. Are we alienating them? Are we telling them that they're stupid? Are we saying that everything in culture is doomed because of them, that Gen Z is ruining America? I sure hope not, because I really do believe we have an opportunity with this generation that we've never had in modern history to reclaim and redefine pride in what it means to be an American, to have a sense of national identity again, to have a stake in the future of our country that we are fighting for. And I don't just say that to talk out of my butt. I say that because that's objectively true. New polling and surveying has found that young men in America, high school seniors, the same people that I saw turn out in droves to these events across Iowa on Friday, are the most conservative they have ever been since the 1950s. I see more and more Gen Zers deleting their dating apps every day, also supported by polling and information out there from Pew Research, for example, and instead wanting to date with purpose for the intention of getting married. Over 80% of our generation still says that we want to get married in a culture and a time where marriage is no longer normal. Teenagers are having record low numbers of premarital sex, and we can argue about the reasons for that all day long, but talk about an opportunity to redefine conservative values in relationships today. Young people over the last several major elections have voted more and more conservatively over time from 2018 to today. If you look at exit polling from 2018 to 2020 to 2022 and hopefully now to 2024, it is literally like a straight line, like the y equals mx plus b slope that you learned in high school, voting for more Republican candidates, voting for more conservative policies, and generally embracing a more conservative worldview. And that's without any messaging, zero coherent messaging or strategy from the Republican Party and the conservative movement. If we really want to see a different America than the one we live in today, it not only starts with maybe a fresh face and some new candidacies to bring this forward, maybe not even in this election, but moving forward into any other election, which we should all be happy about, but it also requires a change in our messaging. And I have nothing but respect and support for what the Ramaswamy campaign is doing to make just that happen. All right, you guys, I know it's a very short stream today because I'm still dealing with my cold that I have to save my voice for the rest of the week for. But really quick before we go, drop in the chat. I'm dying to know if you guys have any predictions, projections, any thoughts, fortune telling for what is going to happen tonight at the Iowa Caucus. I am dying to know. Drop it in the chat. I, for one, probably predict that the Donald Trump campaign is going to win the Iowa caucus, but I think Vivek Ramaswamy is going to very much outperform what the mainstream media is suggesting that he is going to do. I'm dying to know. Foxy says Nikki Haley is not qualified. Fascinating. That's very, very fascinating. Vash says Vivek 2024 in the chat. Anybody else have any thoughts on what's going to go on tonight in Iowa? Dun, 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 dun. It's a big day. A lot of people saying Vivek. Jason says Trump number 1, Vivek number 2. The rest, I don't really care. Interesting. That's fascinating. Quellum says Vivek will shock the world. Night Beast, Vivek runs away with 2nd. Interesting. Vosh says, Isabel's right. I'm here in Iowa, and that's what I expect tonight, too. Fascinating. Reese says the majority of the youth stand with Vivek. SQ Lara, Vivek for POTUS 2024. Mason, Vivek is going to shock the world. Adam, Iowan here, precinct captain for Vivek 2024. Fascinating. Like I said, I think there's a lot more to the story than what the mainstream media is painting this out to be, and certainly what you're seeing on Twitter. If you're getting all of your information from Twitter, please, I implore you, just turn it off for a little while. Turn it off for a few hours at the very least. But I'm anxious to see what ends up shaking up tonight. I could be totally wrong on all of this, but I'm very grateful for the authentic and very kind and welcoming experience that I had in Iowa with Vivek Ramaswamy last Friday. All right, you guys, off to conserve my voice until tomorrow's stream. We've got some stellar guests lined up for you this week to cover the World Economic Forum, to cover the March for Life, and everything in between. So join us back here tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. And before you go, especially if you're a new, because YouTube, we set a huge streaming record today, do me a favor and like this stream so that other people have the chance to see it. That could look like a little thumbs up or a heart, depending on where you're watching. And most importantly, smash that follow or subscribe button so that you guys always know when we're going live and when we have some new videos to share with you soon. Full Iowa vlog coming to you guys in the next couple of days. Thanks so much. Love ya. We're back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern.